icons and material popping up. I will say good morning to all attending the RTA's virtual meeting of the Board of Directors. I want to remind the members of the board, please turn off and close your computer cameras. And I will call us to order. I apologize to the public and the directors for the delay. Went to a new nothing was going on behind the scenes. We're all working with the new technology, a little different app than the previous meetings. So the 20-minute or so delay was nothing more than trying to get the last few directors' audio to work through the system that we have and are using today. I want to remind everyone that the governor's emergency declaration remains in force during the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to his executive orders declaring a public health emergency and recent amendments to the Open Meetings Act. We will continue to operate under permission to conduct our meetings without the physical attendance requirements. As head of the public body, I find that it is not or practical to hold an in-person meeting or have staff or any members of the board at our headquarters during this meeting. Now, I want to review the guidelines for the meeting. First, keep your audio on mute as much as possible in order to minimize background noise, which may impede the recording of this meeting. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand and the secretary, Audrey, will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, state your name before beginning so that the comments can be attributed properly to you in the record. And when we get to voting, please raise your hand to make a motion or a second. Audrey will identify who's making the motion and the second for the record. Are there any questions at this time?
I see no hands raised.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that said, I will now call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority officially to order. I will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance as is customary when we're in person. Keep yourselves muted, please, and I will recite the pledge for us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get into our regular agenda, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Heather and Garland Armstrong for their years of transit advocacy in our region. Later this month, the two of them will be moving to Iowa. I want to thank them for all they've done for our system before they left, and I wish them luck as they move forward to their transit advocacy work in Iowa. They have been tremendous friends and fixtures and have done so much for the advocacy of people with disabilities who are the riders of our system, and they will be greatly missed. They have tremendous personalities and give us tremendous insight. I also want to acknowledge Director David Andalcio, who was honored by the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as the 2020 Hispanic Business Person of the Year. What a tremendous award, and well-deserved. He received the award virtually at the Chamber's National Conference last month. That's quite an honor, and congratulations, David. We're very proud of you. All right, with that, we'll get into the meat of the day. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Nadine, you have your hand raised?
I do. I've been trying to break in. It appears that we're still not live on the YouTube feed, so if we could pause before we take any actions that require a vote, that would be appreciated. I'm told it's just going to be a minute or two.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Should we wait on the roll call then?
Yes, we should.
Okay.
And I would advise that we go back and do the quick introductions that the chairman just made as well, and the two acknowledgements that he made just for the record.
It's not going in there. There's no what we call that enable the web stream on this one. Hold on. Yeah. The what?
You still working on YouTube, Audrey?
I don't know. I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm not sure if you could hear me before I was speaking, and I was basically saying that obviously we want to keep engagement as high as we can. So we thought, out of an abundance of caution, once we realized the YouTube link wasn't working, that we should take a quick pause. It appears that the link on our website is working for the public. So I
Great.
think we can go ahead and proceed.
So Audrey, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Leanne had asked for if we start with the acknowledgements so they are on the record.
Sure. For the record, before we get into our regular agenda, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Heather and Garland Armstrong for their years of tremendous transit advocacy in our region. Later this month, they will be moving to Iowa, and I want to thank them for all they've done for our system before they leave, and I wish them luck as they move forward with their transit advocacy work in Iowa. Iowans will be lucky, and the people of Des Moines lucky to have Heather and Garland in their midst. They were tremendous, tremendous advocates, and I learned so much about what we need to do, especially for people with disabilities on our transit system. And they have brightened up our meetings month after month, and I wish them well, and hopefully they come back and visit us. I'd also like to acknowledge a tremendous award that Director David Amdalcio received. He was honored by the United States Chamber of Commerce, so this is the United States, as the 2020 Hispanic Business Person of the Year. He received the award virtually at the Chamber's National Conference last month. And then it's a tremendous, tremendous honor. Congratulations, David. You make us very, very proud at the RTA. So with that, Audrey, why don't you take the roll?
Okay, let's get started here. Director Andalcio.
Here.
Director Canty.
Here.
Director Carey.
Here.
Director Colson.
Here.
Director Fraga. Unmute. Director Fraga?
Yes. Here.
Okay, thank you. Director Fuentes.
Here.
Director Gathing.
Here.
Director Groven.
Here.
Director Holt.
Present.
Director Cotel.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Melvin.
Here.
Director Pang.
Here.
Director Ross.
Here.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Present.
We have a full house, 16 present and no absent.
Thank you. And again, to the directors, thank you for your patience. And to the public, just to get on the record one more time, nothing was going on behind the scenes other than a frantic technical response by our IT staff to try to get 2 or 3 of the directors to have their audio heard. So that was the reason for the delay, which is, in this day and age, it's not unheard of to have delays for technical reasons. Item 3A is the report of the executive session we held at our last meeting on September 20th, or excuse me, September 10th of 2020. And Allison, would you please kind of walk us through what we did, and then we'll approve the minutes from the board meeting and the executive session that we held on September 10th. Allison?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, the board met in executive session on September 10th, 2020 to review the executive session meeting minutes docket. At that meeting, a determination was made that the meeting minutes from October 17th, 2019 no longer require confidential treatment and are available for public inspection. The board also determined that the verbatim recordings from January 2015 through February 2019 can be destroyed as they have satisfied the statutory retention period. That's all.
Great, thank you, Allison. And just for the public, Allison is one of our general counsels. She's also our ethics officer. So item 3B is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting and the executive session held on September 10th of 2020. Are there any comments or corrections to these minutes?
There are no questions.
Great, thank you, Madam Secretary. If not, I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to approve these minutes as submitted. Please remember to use the hand raising tool so Audrey can identify who is making the motion and the second.
Director Andalcio has moved and Director Pang has seconded. You can lower your hands. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If there are no questions or comments, will the secretary please take the roll?
Director Andalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fraga.
Aye.
Good job. Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gathing.
Yes.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel. You have to unmute. Director Cotel.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Melvin. Dr. Melvin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, aye. Aye.
Okay, thank you. Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Aye.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes,
16 ayes.
thank you. Then that will be, is approved and so reported. Item 4 is the public comments segment of the meeting. We have asked the public to submit their comments via electronic mail. Any comments received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Audrey, did we receive any comments this month?
We did not.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to item 5, which is the executive director's report from Leanne Redden. Leanne, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and directors. In my report this morning, I'll briefly highlight several issues that are going to be addressed actually in greater detail as part of today's agenda. So moving to the next slide, please. Agenda item 6B is the ordinance to approve the 2021 budget marks for the regional system and the 3 service boards. As discussed previously, those figures are based on the latest economic analysis from Moody's, and they also reflect the current uncertainty about the new federal relief for transit. So as you know, the RTA, CTA, Metra and PACE, as well as the American Public Transit Association, have consistently been advocating that $32 billion is needed for the US transit systems. The HEROES Act previously passed, the HEROES Act passed by the US House of Representatives that included that amount, but it seems unlikely that that's going to gain Senate or presidential approval prior to the election. So we keep working and keep watching, and we'll keep you informed. But without more federal relief, everyone recognizes that a transit funding crisis is on our horizon. There are many different ideas on how to prepare for it, and only the RTA board is uniquely situated to lead in this crucial effort. So moving on to the next slide, agenda item 7B is a proposed strategy for the RTA board to address our region's long-term COVID recovery. But today in this meeting, we're going to focus almost solely on the near term. So that'll be a focus on the 2021 budget process that'll culminate in December and the crisis that looms in its aftermath approximately 6 to 9 months from now. So make no mistake, the 3 COVID recovery steps that staff will outline today and in the months to come are vitally important, whether or not additional federal COVID relief emerges. They will not only help our region weather this crisis, but also prepare the transit system to thrive in its aftermath. And because the stakes couldn't really be any higher, I'd just like to preview the 3 steps that we'll explain in more detail under item 7B. So next slide, please. So step 1 is from October to December, we will adopt a 2021 budget, work on that, and that will reflect the realities of the current crisis. The second step will be to execute the 2021 budget from January and through about the June timeframe, making decisions as needed to sustain during this time of uncertainty. And a lot of that will be dictated by whether we receive or don't receive federal dollars. And then the third step that we're proposing is beginning in approximately May 21 to engage in a strategic recovery planning effort and consider how to reinvent transit in our region with an outlook of 2022 and beyond. Each step will be informed by 3 policy principles that I'll get into in that 7B item. So moving on to the next slide. The RTA board is uniquely mandated to lead, and because the RTA's board's unique regional leadership role, today and in the November and December meetings, staff will inform members of what is at stake and what the board can do to help meet these challenges. So to be quite frank, what we need from you as our board members is your full engagement and your resolve now and throughout 21 and beyond. So the RTA's role is to advocate for the service boards and to help them deal with financial challenges. especially in extreme challenges like COVID-19 has presented us. It's vitally important that the RTA board and staff receive detailed information about the factors shaping the service board's plans. So by providing insight into their respective approaches, the CTA, Metra and PACE can help us and the RTA board better understand those choices and more efficiently and effectively advocate for them. By leading the region through this crisis planning, the RTA board can help ensure that decisions about where to direct resources that can minimize residents' pain and maximize the support for the region's economy. So moving on to the next slide, just very quickly, I'll just highlight the state delinquency numbers. So through the end of September, the state owes the RTA region $238 million. The state is behind on the debt service reimbursement on the ASA side by about 3 months, by about 15 months on the AFA fund side, and the equivalent of about 4.2 months behind on the public transportation fund, which is the match to the sales tax. The year-to-date cost of us, the RTA, having to carry the short-term debt so we can make the service boards whole in the monies that are due to them, has cost us year-to-date about $3.9 million. And finally, I just want to note that there is agenda item 6A is an ordinance that finalizes the multi-step amendments to the 2020 budget process. And most specifically, that's around the final piece of that, which is the amendments to the ADA paratransit budget. So that concludes my report, and we'll dive into some of these items a bit more in detail, but I'd be happy to answer any questions right now.
Thank you, Diane. Any questions for the executive director at this time?
I don't see any hands raised.
Then we'll move on to item 6, which includes the items that are required for board action today. And we'll hear from staff on these items and vote on each individually following staff remarks and any questions or comments from the board. 6A is the ordinance amending the 2020 PACE ADA paratransit budget. And Doug's going to brief the board. Doug, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is Doug Anderson, Manager of Budgets and Analysis at the RTA. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, thank you. The ordinance before you in item 6A adopts a revised 2020 operating budget for ADA paratransit and incorporates it into the regional operating budget adopted by the board in August. Next slide, please. This action will complete the multi-month process we recommended to restore the 2020 ADA paratransit funding and budget to sufficient levels. As you will recall, back in August, we asked the board to adopt an ADA paratransit budget, which had already become obsolete due to the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on both ADA paratransit ridership levels and the productivity of PACE's ADA paratransit operation. At that time, the RTA executive director informed the board that PACE had formally requested an additional $13 million of ADA paratransit funding for 2020. The board subsequently amended the ADA paratransit funding level in September and required PACE to submit a revised budget within 30 days. We are also asking you to correct an error in the calculation of the regional recovery ratio that accompanied August's budget amendment. Next slide, please. The proposed 2020 ADA paratransit budget, shown in bold in the fourth column of this table, conforms to PACE's requested funding level of $160.8 million while meeting the required recovery ratio of 10% by applying authorized capital cost of contracting and security expense exclusions. Operating expense and operating revenue have both increased from the August amendment due to the extension of COVID-19 mitigation actions such as single passenger rides, and due to an improving ridership outlook. It is important to note that projected ADA expense and funding remain well below the levels of the original 2020 budget, shown in the second column of the table, and that all incremental funding will be provided from ADA paratransit reserve funds held at the RTA, as we communicated last month. Finally, the second 2020 budget amendment gives us the opportunity to correct an error unrelated to ADA paratransit in the calculation of the regional recovery ratio. Back in August, we asked you to adopt a budget showing a regional recovery ratio of 51.3%. The correction of the error in the calculation results in a regional recovery ratio that is a 0.5 percentage point lower at 50.8%, still above the 50% requirement. The ordinance attachments correct that error and show the proposed changes to the ADA paratransit budget while leaving the operating budgets of CTA, Metra, PACE, and the RTA agency unchanged from the August amendment. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'll try my best to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Doug. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Checking. I see no hands raised.
Then I'd entertain a motion and a second to approve this ordinance.
Director Ross moves. And Director Fuentes seconds.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. So Madam Secretary, please take a roll call on 6A.
Director Andalcio?
Yes.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director Frega?
Yes.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Yes.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes,
16 ayes.
thank you. That is approved and will be so reported. 6B is the ordinance establishing estimates of amounts available to the service boards for their 2021 to 2023 operating budgets, the required recovery ratios for 2021, and the preliminary 21 to 2025 capital programs fund. And on this one, Bill Lackman will brief the board. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. As Chairman Dillard said, this is Bill Lackman, RTA Treasurer and Budget Manager. We covered the proposed funding amounts for the 2021 budget and 5-year capital program in detail at last month's meeting. To avoid compromising the budget timeline, the service boards were directed to move forward with the development of their proposed budgets and capital programs under the assumption that the funding levels we presented last month, or something very close to them, would eventually be adopted. As you will recall, there was a lengthy discussion about the capital funding allocation process. We have worked with the service board leadership to make some adjustments to the proposed ordinance to clarify the timing of the implementation of performance-based consideration. There were no changes to the operating or capital funding amounts versus last month's proposal. The only changes were to the wording of the memo and the ordinance. The temporary set-aside of approximately $818 million of federal formula and state pay-go funds in the final year of the capital program, 2025, remains. Since the funding amounts did not change, I will briefly recap those before asking you to consider this for approval. Next slide, please. This table shows the amounts of RTA operating funding proposed for each service board compared to the previous 2021 plan adopted last December with the original 2020 budget. As Doug Anderson mentioned last month, due to sales tax declines in 2020, which are expected to persist into 2021, operating funding levels for the service boards are projected to be 23% to 26% lower than the previous 2021 plan, with RTA funding down by a total of $415 million. Remember that the expected carryover of approximately $540 million of CARES Act funding from 2020 will help mitigate the declines shown here. Although that CARES Act funding is not projected to offset the combined impact of 2021 funding and fair revenue losses. Next slide, please. And to recap the capital funding levels, we do anticipate a 5-year capital program in excess of $6 billion. Federal sources still represent more than half of the projected funding. However, state funding from Rebuild Illinois in the form of state bond proceeds and PAYGO funding comprise more than 1/3 of the funding pie. Next slide, please. As the calendar shows, budget season is progressing. We are expecting the service boards to meet tomorrow's deadline for submitting proposed budget and capital program details to the RTA staff. Due to the uncertainty surrounding additional federal stimulus, those operating budgets are expected to show significant imbalances, to be resolved with additional relief funding or budgeted balancing actions in the event that such funding does not materialize. In advance of the scheduled county board presentations and November Finance Committee meeting, RTA staff will work to summarize the proposed service board budgets and provide you with details on the magnitude and nature of any potential relief funding or expense reductions needed. It is our understanding that the service boards are in agreement with the proposed funding levels following the wording modifications in the ordinance. Accordingly, staff is requesting board adoption of the funding amounts as presented. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to the staff and to so many members of the board. This takes a lot of time, a lot of tedious negotiations, and very much appreciate how many hours have been spent on this. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, before we address questions and comments and take a vote, I was remiss in skipping over Director Lewis on the voting of the minutes and the ADA budget amendment. So if Director Lewis, if you would like to voice your position at this time.
Yes, on both.
Thank you. The record will be corrected to include Director Lewis on both votes as approving.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Michael, thanks, Director Lewis.
I see Director Fuentes' hand is up.
Yes, Director Fuentes. Phil, good morning.
Yeah, put it down, sorry.
Nope, still
Sorry.
showing.
No,
Oh, now it's down. Okay. I don't see any other hands with questions.
All right. With that, can I have a motion and a second to approve 6B?
I motion that, this is John Fraga, I motion that we approve.
And Chris Groven has his hand to second.
Thank you, Director Groven and Director Fraga. With that, Madam Secretary Audrey, will you please take the roll?
Sure. Director Andalcio?
Yes.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Polson?
Yes.
Director Fraga?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Yes.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Melvin,
Yes.
Director Payne,
Yes.
Director Ross,
Yes.
Director Sager,
I am going to vote yes, but I do need to make a comment. I had my hand raised, but I didn't get a chance to quite get in there before the vote was taken. And that is that, you know, I am willing to support these marks. I think that that's important for us to do so at this time, but I'm doing that with the absolute agreement with the request from Leanne. And that is that as we move forward, that we are as directors incredibly engaged and work to resolve some of the long-term issues that are going to have to be addressed as we move forward. So I just want to put that in there. I want to ensure that there is an adequate voice and adequate representation and adequate opportunity for us to have some degree of opportunity to assure ourselves, to wrestle through with the issues and resolve ourselves to make sure that we are working in a cooperative manner, not just for downtown services, but frankly for suburban services through Metro and PACE. So I do vote yes, however. Thank you.
Chairman Dillard.
Yes, and I want to assure Director Sager there will be plenty of discussion, and as time goes on, we'll have a better handle as to what the federal government is doing, as well as where we are in our fight against the pandemic. But I have a feeling this year we'll probably have more discussion than probably ever before on the future of not only operations but capital funding for the entire RTA system. So Brian will have plenty of discussion and look forward to not only the board's comments, but also those of your appointing authorities, as well as civic groups and the public in general, and most importantly, our riders. Thank you.
16 ayes.
Thank you. So 6B is adopted. 6C is an ordinance authorizing the reappointment of an RTA pension trustee. And again, Bill, you want to say a word about this wonderfully educated pension trustee we have?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is Bill Ackman again, this time as the chair of the RTA Pension Board of Trustees. Before you is a request to reappoint Zaid Abdul Alim, a non-employee member of the RTA Pension Board. First, a little background about the Pension Plan Board of Trustees for newer members of the RTA Board. The RTA pension plan covers all RTA employees as well as non-represented employees of Metra and PACE. The membership of the RTA Pension Board of Trustees consists of 3 transit agency trustees, 1 each from the RTA, that's me, from Metra, CFO Tom Farmer, and from PACE, CFO Dominic Cuomo, and 4 non-employee trustees. In April 2016, the RTA Board approved bylaws that set the terms for the then current and future non-employee trustees. As for Zaid Abdul Alim, his first term expires on December 31st of this year. The meeting packet contained an outline of his professional background. To be brief, Mr. Abdul Alim has over 20 years of experience in the investment and financial services industry. He is a senior investment professional with advisory experience across multiple asset classes, including equities, fixed income, private equity, and hedge funds. He is currently managing director of Moelis & Company, a global independent investment bank. Mr. Abdul Alim is a graduate of Harvard University Business School's Next Generation Executive Program. He also holds Master of Arts and Applied Baccalaureate degrees from Duke University and was a Fulbright Scholar. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Unfortunately, due to Zaid's busy schedule, I will not be able to introduce you to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And to all the trustees, we have a very stable and well-funded pension plan. It's one of the reasons we continue to have one of the highest credit ratings of any unit of local government in the state of Illinois. And while we read a lot about public pensions in Illinois, ours is one of the finest managed and most secure that's there, and Wall Street recognizes that. So with that, any questions or comments about the reappointment of this RTA pension trustee?
I see no hands.
If not, how about a motion and a second to approve him?
Director Canty makes the motion. And Director Andalcio seconds.
Thank you, too. So with that, Audrey, will you please take the roll on the reappointment?
Director Andalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Yes.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Yes.
Director Frega.
Yes.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
New board member. Director Gathing.
Yes.
Director Groven.
Yes.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel. Director Cotel. Unmute. I can't hear you. Director Cotel. Raise your hand if you are voting in favor. We've lost Director Cotel, it appears. Director Melvin. Director Melvin?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Director
voted yes.
Payne?
Thank you.
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Okay, there we go. 16 ayes.
Thank you.
I lost,
Perfect roll call.
Audio for some reason temporarily.
Okay, you're back now.
Okay.
Got you, Tom. Thank you very much. 16-0 on the reappointment of the pension trustee, and the record will so reflect. Next is 6D, which is expense reimbursements. They are in your packet. Any questions on these? If not, can I have a motion in a second, please?
Director Cotel moves. And Director Carey seconds.
Great. You want to take a roll call on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Vote on this and also the last motion that was not called on the last motion, so I'm going to vote yes on both.
I don't know how I managed to do that again. Sorry.
The record will so
Director
reflect.
Melvin?
Thank you, Director.
Yes.
Director Payne?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager? Director
Yes.
Sager? Okay. Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes and no absent.
Thank you. And 6D will be approved. Next is 6E, which is the resolution setting the RTA 2021 meeting schedule. It's hard to believe it's 2021. And I think you've all been sent it in advance. We've checked it, double checked it. And I know Audrey will send out after we approve it today, sort of a lock-in meeting reminder to all of us. And hopefully 21 will be a less dramatic year than 2021. We'll see how the pandemic goes, but 2020 was interesting. We finally got a capital bill, and it's so nice to see a third of that pie when we were going through our capital funding coming from the state of Illinois again, but then we hit the pandemic. So hopefully here's to a better 2021. Can I have a motion and a second to approve our meeting schedule for next year, please?
Director Gathing moves.
I second it. John Frega.
Director Frega seconds.
Thank you very much. And with that, will you please take the roll, Madam Secretary?
Sure. Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel? Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you. And our 2021 meeting schedule is approved. Next is 7A, and that's the report on our monthly financial results. How are we doing, B?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is B. Raina Hickey, CFO for the RTA. Today, I will cover the year-to-date financial results through August 2020. Keep in mind that the results are being compared to the amended 2020 budget. Next slide, please. System ridership through August was 52.5% below prior year, but 2.3% higher than the amended budget. CTA and PACE reported favorable to budget results, while Metro was unfavorable by 8.8%, which is highlighted in red as the August commuter rail ridership was just under 10% of normal levels. ADA paratransit ridership was favorable to budget by 18.2% through August, highlighted in light blue and a contributing factor to the budget amendment presented earlier. Next slide, please. Looking at operating revenue, total operating revenue of $722.8 million was $29.6 million, or 3.9% unfavorable to budget. PACE Suburban Service reported a favorable variance of 1.6% due to favorable ridership results. CTA Metro and ADA Paratransit all reported operating revenue shortfalls in excess of 3%. Some of this unfavorable variance is due to the timing of CARES Act funding requisitions. The service boards included in their operating revenue $350.3 million of CARES Act funding requisitioned for fair revenue losses through August, as authorized by the May funding amendment. Next slide, please. Next, we have the public funding results. Continuing the positive trend, sales tax performance has been better than expected, which was recognized with the funding amendment in last month's meeting. July sales tax are projected to come in less than 6% below 2019, so better than expected. The real estate transfer tax also outperformed the amended budget through August and contributed to CTA's favorable variance of 2.2%. We also see strong funding results of 13.3% favorable at PACE Suburban Service. ADA paratransit funding was adjusted to the level contained in the May funding amendment, beginning with June's payment to PACE, resulting in a 0 year-to-date variance. Total regional public funding through August is expected to surpass budget by $27.6 million, or 2.8%. Next slide, please. System-wide operating expenses through August were $59.5 million, or 3.2% favorable to the amended budgets. CTA's expenses were less favorable to budget than Metro and PACE through August, as CTA continues to operate at a full schedule. Metro and PACE are operating reduced schedules, and as a result have significantly favorable expense variances. ADA paratransit expense finished 7.8% unfavorable to their budget due to the extension of COVID-19 mitigation efforts and recovering ridership. ADA's worsening expense performance was addressed with the budget amendment presented earlier. For next month, we will compare results to that amended budget. Next slide, please. Looking at the net result, it was 57.5 million favorable to budget due to improving public funding and good expense performance. As we move later in the year, the net result should show a diminishing surplus as the CARES Act requisitions are trued up. Due to ADA's paratransit's unfavorable expense performance, that net result finished with a 9.2 million deficit. Next slide, please. Looking at the recovery ratio, with the 350.3 million of CARES Act funding included, the regional recovery ratio shown in the right-hand section of this table has improved to exactly 50% through August, now 0.4 percentage points above budget. With CARES Act funding, CTA and Metro reported recovery ratios close to budget, while PACE's solid expense performance contributed to their highlighted favorable result. The ADA paratransit recovery ratio surpassed budget by 0.7 points with credits applied. On the left side of the table, you can see that in the absence of CARES Act funding, the recovery ratio for each service board and the region would be less than 30%. That concludes my remarks. I'll try my best to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Any questions or comments from the board on the monthly financial result report?
I am not seeing any hands.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bea. We'll move on to item 7B, and that's the COVID-19 recovery planning next steps. Jill Leary will brief the board on our continuing work on COVID-19 recovery steps.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, it's Leanne. I'll take that
hi,
one.
Leanne. Okay.
I'm here. I'll do this one. Giving Jill a month off in the sense she's here and she's on the meeting, but she's been doing a heavy lift in terms of board meetings the last few. So I'll just take this. So as I touched on, though, in my ED report, the board has discussed with us a strong desire to help sustain the regional transit system in the coming months as the region and our transit systems really seek to recover from the pandemic's effect. So today I'll be sharing what staff is proposing as recommendations on how we can move that forward. We're looking for your input and your opinions and direction in order to ensure that we are approaching these issues from a regional perspective and with a general regional consensus. So next slide, please. So as a reminder, the RTA's approach to recovery planning so far has had several steps or activities within it, and I'll just kind of refresh you on those steps. We've continued to lean into our existing strategic vision and goals from the strategic plan. We're also monitoring the status of the transit and communicating about the impacts with stakeholders through our dashboard, as well as direct emails to a list of people that are looking for that information. We've also been participating in and coordinating with several recovery efforts that others are also leading. We've also conducted scenario planning work, and that project has really talked about what the future might hold and changes that we might need to make as a system. Staff presented information about this project to you in our last meeting, and a project summary of that is now available, also posted on our website. And that also included a variety of stakeholder meetings and inputs, as well as work with the service boards. Excuse me. So based on those direct discussions with members of the board, you've stated that in addition to securing the near-term financial health of the system, we need to be examining ways in which travel patterns and transit may look different post-COVID-19. And how we can be best positioned, really the regional transit system to thrive in the long term. So today we're going to just walk through our approach for how to accomplish this. So next slide. Excuse me. The memo that was included in your board packet includes a high-level overview of a potential path forward. The intent is to lay out clear steps that will leverage the budget process effectively, sustain transit in the near future if federal relief is not secured, and move some of the larger change discussions into a longer-term recovery planning effort. So I gave an overview of these 3 steps in my ED report, and in a minute I'm going to go over them in a bit more detail. But before I do that, let's touch on what we're kind of calling policy priorities that we recommend that you and staff use to guide each step of that COVID-19 recovery work. So next slide. So based on the current goals of Invest in Transit, feedback we received during the recent scenario planning process, and our existing statutory responsibilities, staff is recommending that the board focus on the following policy priorities to guide each step towards COVID recovery. So first, to identify immediate funding solutions to support the transit system, including advocating for federal aid, exploring new revenue solutions, and considering how to leverage resources to meet short-term needs most effectively. Additionally, that critical transit services are sustained to provide mobility for those who most need public transportation at this time. And that includes all transit riders, but specifically bus riders, essential workers, residents with economic hardships across the region, and people with disabilities. The overall, and then finally, I think the final principle is overall to take an increasingly transparent and collaborative approach to communicating with stakeholders and the public about projected budget shortfalls, possible impending cuts, and other potential disruptions to service that may come in our future. So these priorities reflect the RTA's desire to support the service board's difficult choices in 21 and beyond. In addition to helping the board navigate steps 1 and 2 in the nearer term, these policy priorities can also guide the RTA board's activities in step 3, building on progress towards recovery and hopefully to reinvent our transit system and make it even better and stronger in the future. So to that end, I'll ask you at the end of this if you think that they are good priorities to guide us. But right now I'll move on to the 3 steps and provide you a little bit more detail on those. So next slides. The board's first step through its 2021 budget adoption process should be to focus on near-term contingency planning to manage a potential financial crisis in the coming year. As part of the annual budgeting process that is underway, each service board is working to define estimates of when their Federal CARES Act dollars will be exhausted. And without additional federal relief, we project at least a $400 million system-wide shortfall in 21. And that will likely increase when we see the service board's proposed budgets next month. As a result, staff recommends that the RTA board engage with the service boards about how they are handling that shortfall. Related, and as is customary in the regular annual budget process, staff included a list of recommended questions in the memo that can be addressed by each of the service boards when they present their 21 proposed budgets to you at our upcoming November meeting. The budget presentations and the responses to those questions will provide you as the board an informed regional perspective about the funding gaps that might need to be filled and the magnitude of any potential service cuts and actions and communications that will be considered by the service boards and also the RTA if additional federal funding does not arrive in early 2021. So next slide. Moving on to step number 2, following the adoption of the 21 budget, staff is recommending that the board should continue to discuss topics related to the 3 policy priorities, ensuring it will have as much information as possible to inform your decisions if additional relief funding doesn't materialize, and if the regional budgets need to be amended next year. The intent is to have presentations and discussions at monthly board meetings starting in January. Again, this will shift focus to the important topics on each priority area that the RTA board needs to consider. So how can the RTA board work to identify immediate funding solutions? How can the RTA board support the service board's effort to sustain critical transit services? And how can the RTA board guide the agency to take transparent, collaborative approaches to communicating with stakeholders and the public? Staff and invited speakers will provide information and address questions in these three areas. The intent of the discussions will be to help lay out a groundwork for developing a regional contingency plan if federal funding is not secured. In the event that relief funding is secured in early 21 or before, the focus can then just shift to working towards the longer-term strategic recovery efforts. So next slide. Moving to step 3, beyond the near-term decisions that may confront the RTA and the service boards in early 21, further board guidance is going to be needed to transform the strategic direction for the RTA system from investing in our transit system to reinventing the transit system. So to advance that discussion, staff recommends that we initiate an update on the strategic regional plan in mid-2021 after contingency planning efforts that are outlined in the near-term planning efforts are completed. Those areas of focus can be continued for further discussion and refinement through a longer planning effort to update the strategic plan before it expires in 2023. Revisiting the framework for the transit capital investments would be rolled into the early parts of that discussion and that work effort. As we would plan to begin the process for programming the set-asides for 2025 federal dollars and the PAYGO funds. Near-term discussions in steps 1 and 2 may yield some longer-term recommendations that could be considered in the next strategic planning process. And the approximate timeframe to start this work would be, this step 3 work would be May 2021, when we expect to propose a scope and more detailed schedule to you as a board for your consideration. So next slide. So we know that there are many stakeholders and some members of the public who are also interested and who are following our activities and may want to provide feedback about the current regional transit budget work that's being done as well. So I want to just highlight and note there are many opportunities for doing so right now or in the coming few weeks. First, as part of the budget process, the RTA will hold its public hearing virtually on December 3rd, beginning at 5 p.m. The public will be able to join that meeting live during the scheduled time period to provide comments. More details surrounding the public hearing process will be provided in upcoming weeks. The service boards are also going to be holding hearings. Metra and PACE will also have virtual public hearings and each have instructions for how to participate in those events and meetings on their respective websites. The CTA will also be holding annual public hearings, but they have not yet publicly announced those dates and times, but that information will be forthcoming very shortly. Interested parties can also submit written comments online when the draft budget materials are finalized and posted by each agency and by the RTA through November and early December. And we encourage people to review the budget documents carefully, written by all of our staffs at each of the 4 agencies, I should say, and provide inputs into the appropriate agency. Also, the RTA has traditionally received very limited feedback about our annual budget, so we hope that the online format and the various ways that we're going to allow people to provide comments in this new forum will encourage more participation and more input. The public is also welcome to provide public communication at all of our board meetings. We include the board, included in the board materials this time were 2 such letters we received last week. Comments are related to the investment framework that were discussed at previous meetings. The letters also make several broad suggestions regarding changes to priority practices and the precedences of the way the RTA, the service boards, have operated and allocated funds in the past. So we've shared that information with you. In the case of those letters, as with all public feedback received, we will share them with the board. We also review the input received as professional staff and appreciate the time that has been taken to submit those letters. In the case of the 2 specific letters included in this month's packet, we believe many of the requests of the RTA will be sort of taken up and addressed in the next steps that we have outlined in these efforts today. So more to come on those in the coming months. Many of our current priorities are established by statutory requirements, previous board action, and the Invest in Transit strategic plan that were created through public processes and cannot be changed without likewise public process. So as we embark on these steps, we want to remain in a posture of openness to discussion and debate, while also recognizing that we serve a large and diverse region with a wide variety of needs and requests that must all be considered as we go forward. All that is to say, we welcome public feedback and dialogue. And as we develop a new future strategic plan over beginning early next year with our service board partners, we hope that stakeholders will be ready and willing to talk about what new priorities and new ways of doing business they would like us to consider as we work together, the 4 agencies, to improve the transit system for the region. So next slide. So back to the recommended next steps and recovery planning for the RTA board. We want to end by noting that it is critical for us to pay close attention to the immediate budget process and the potential crisis plan for 2021. With the very real prospect of service cuts facing the region by mid-21, we cannot leave those outcomes to chance. Together, the RTA and service boards must rally as a region and ensure that operational resources are available where they are needed most during this pandemic, but also ensure that resources are available for what we hope will be a regional transit recovery in the latter part of 21 and 22. Transit is an essential service for our region's most vulnerable communities and is an essential part of the region's post-COVID economic recovery for all. So this will require careful planning and trade-offs, not just within CTA, Metro and PACE, but possibly even among the 3 service boards. With that, staff is seeking any input and feedback you might have today, and we're happy to hear your thoughts, both on the 3 steps that we have laid out here, and secondly, on sort of the policy guidance that we have laid out for you in this memo. So with that, I'd be happy to hear any thoughts or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Any questions or comments from the board on our COVID-19 recovery plan moving forward?
I do not see any hands raised.
Great, thank you. So we'll move off of 7B, and thank you, Leanne, for that report, and thank you, Jill, for all the work you've put into it, and staff as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I just may, sorry.
Sure.
You know, if the board has other comments, you know, we'd be happy to still hear those going forward. Otherwise, staff will sort of proceed based on this outline as an affirmation from the board that you think that this is a good direction for us to go. So I guess I'll just sort of ask one more time if there are any thoughts or comments before we, otherwise we will proceed with this kind of outline.
Director Carey has a question.
Not a question, a couple comments. I think it's a good approach. I like several things. I like the detailed questions that we're asking the service boards to be able to answer and the detailed information when they present their budgets. I think that will be a great help to us in making sound decisions as we go forward. I particularly like, well, I agree with and like the recovery policy priorities. And I think the move to become increasingly transparent with what we're doing and with what cuts may need to be made in the future, to do that sooner than later, I think is beneficial to the public at large and providers. And lastly, I guess I just want to, we're challenged with really two, which I think we need to kind of look at separately with two things. We've got an immediate crisis related to COVID and the decrease in ridership, decrease in revenue. And we'll need to make certain decisions as what's best to do in the current situation in order to, as one of the priorities says, sustain the critical services. However, then kind of, in a different part of our brain, as it were, we need to look at the strategic goal of reinventing transit. So I think it's important that we make sure that we understand, that the service boards understand that decisions made in the nearer term don't mean that, for instance, if we need to divert funds to one service board because that's where we have more riders currently than another, that doesn't mean that that's going to be that way forever, that isn't a strategic, that's more tactical decision based on the crisis that we're in. But strategically, it doesn't mean that we won't look at all service boards and the importance of transit across the region. I think we need, as board members, to keep that regional word firmly in mind as we go forward. Thank you.
Director Lewis has his hand raised.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with Director Carey. I think that is just the right approach, and we've really got to be strategic, and we've got to be focused on not only getting through the long term, but the short term too. We won't get to next week if we don't get through tomorrow. So I think that the plan you outlined makes good sense. It's a good logical set of steps that are appropriate, and we will make decisions as we go forward in a sequential basis. One of the things, Leanne, I wanted to clarify, you indicated that some of the mandates that have been put forth and committed to the public are ones that are committed and have to be changed by vote or by some other method. Was I correct in understanding that we're committed to do certain things because that's already been agreed to, and despite this crisis, we still have to undertake those responsibilities?
I guess it was sort of a broad statement, and I guess maybe to try to clarify that is, I think fundamentally what we're saying, no decisions are made without the board fully engaging and providing input, and in some cases, ultimately perhaps providing vote if necessary. But I think the statement was even broader. I mean, there's certain things that are dictated by state statute that we just can't arbitrarily change. They would need approval by the state legislature, for example. So I guess it was sort of a broader, all-encompassing statement to say that, to try to reflect that we, want to have a lot of board and service board inputs. Obviously, the four agencies need to be at the table in any of these discussions, but we also are open to hearing from key stakeholders around the region, and recognize that anything that any budget process, budget allocations, amendments to budgets, updates to strategic plans, all of these kinds of things necessitate both board review and approval after a pretty robust, I would say, broad engagement process. So I don't know if that kind of clarifies what we were saying, but, so it's kind of a combination of all of that is absolutely necessary. And I think we just kind of wanted to make sure that that was well understood by all parties before we go forward.
I think I understand that. I know there's certain unfunded mandates that we have to undertake. And I think what will be important for us to understand as we go through the budget process is what of the budget is committed to things that are, either unfunded mandates or required by law, versus what I heard you say earlier was some of the outside civic groups have had, requests that they wanted us to undertake, and under a steady state environment that might have been appropriate, but under these pandemic circumstances, we may have to make different decisions. So I think you clarified it. I think I understand. I just want to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding what you were trying to convey.
Yeah, and those kinds of very specific issues are the types of things that we intend to discuss at length in more detail with you over the coming months. So yes, there will be more coming. We just kind of wanted to sketch out an initial outline of how we think we might want to try to approach this. And then if sort of getting no action required at this point from you, but just getting sort of feedback and input, we will advance down this path and be sharing, and as we said, having more discussions, more presentations, more information with you, engaging you and others over the coming months.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't see any more hands.
Great, thank you. And those are excellent comments, Michael and Pat. Thank you very much. We haven't seen the last of this, so thank you again, Leanne. I just want to call the board's attention to 7C, which are those civic group comments that Leanne had alluded to in her presentation in 7B. So in 7C, you can read the comments that the civic group sent in since our discussion at the last board meeting. But we're engaged with the civic groups that are listed in those couple of comments that we've received, and we'll continue to, as we always do, welcome the input of our civic groups and have a vibrant discussion with them, as will the service boards. Item 8 is new business. Any issue raised under this item will be for discussion only. Is there any new business to come before the board today?
Director Ross has his hand raised.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I didn't get my hand up soon enough, but back to item 7C, if you don't mind, for just a minute.
Yes, please.
As you know, that a large number of the signatories to those two pieces of correspondence are what I would call city-centric organizations, although they may have some suburban representation. So I just want to encourage us, as we seek input to item 7B and any discussion related specifically to the capital framework, that we look at some organizations that are out in the 5 collar counties that make up the RTA region. I encourage you strongly to do that.
Thank you, JD. That's an excellent point. We need to look at how these civic groups are weighted. They are important, and we listen to them. But one of the major reasons that the RTA was created was to be really the balancing act between the city and the suburbs for the equitable distribution and wise distribution of return on investment of transit dollars available. And I always tell people that the RTA is the Solomon between the suburbs and the city with respect to the distribution of funds. So that's a great point. Thanks, Director Ross. Any other new items to be discussed, or going back to anything else we've had, just as a recap? If not, as a reminder, the next scheduled meeting date for the RTA board is Thursday, November 19th, beginning at 9 o'clock. We'll advise you of the virtual nature or location of this meeting as we get closer to the status of the COVID-19 crisis. We'll update you. Until then, hope everybody stays healthy and safe and votes. Now that we've had our first go around with this new app that we use for our virtual meetings, which delayed us again, I apologize and thank everyone for their patience this morning. We'll advise you, but my guess is we're probably virtual again next month. So if there's no further business to come before the public session of the Board of Directors, I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Please remember to raise your hand raising tool so that the Madam Secretary can identify who's making the motion and the second to adjourn.
I have Director Lewis as a motion and Director Andalcio as a second.
Thank you. With that, you want to take the roll, Madam Secretary?
Sure. Director Andalcio,
Yes.
Director Canty,
Yes.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson,
Yes.
Director Frega,
Yes.
Director Fuentes,
Aye.
Director Gathing,
Yes.
Director Groven,
Yes.
Director Holt,
Aye.
Director Cotel,
Aye.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Melvin,
Yes.
Director Pang,
Yes.
Director Ross,
Yes.
Director Soccer,
Yes.
Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
We
With
stand
that,
adjourned.
thank you. As your fifth grade teacher would tell you, wear a mask, use sanitizer, and wash your hands, and stay healthy, everybody. We need you. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.